Hey friends, thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about the tropics. We've been watching this all week long, and now we come into the weekend and we're getting to crunch time here. So we got some updates from the 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. And I want to start you off looking at our My Radar app and focusing in on the winds layer. And we'll show you here in the app. You can see both storms there are looking pretty healthy in comparison to how they have been looking, especially since Laura, this one over here over the Caribbean island, has had some disorganization with it because it's going over the landmass. So some interaction there, moving pretty quickly along. It is raced across Hispaniola, which is this island where Haiti and the Dominican Republic share land. So it's made it through there. The eye has stayed over water, so that has allowed it to not only maintain, but we have seen a little bit of intensification with this storm today. You can see these reds and yellows showing you where some of the strongest storms have been popping up today. And of course, these blue streamlines up top being some of the stronger winds on the northern edge and that strongest northeast quadrant of the storm here. I'll jump over and give you a look at what is Hurricane Marco today, just a little while ago, earlier this afternoon, reaching hurricane status. And as of the 5 o'clock advisory, it is still a hurricane. It's danced along that Category 1 threshold from tropical storm to Category 1 hurricane. So not a big surprise to see that it has maintained so. And we've seen stronger thunderstorms developing more closely to the center of Marco here. And if I zoom in more so right here on this thunderstorm where this red and yellow patches, that has been the most recent strong convective cell within this whole organized system of the tropical cyclone. So we are seeing the effects of those very warm Gulf waters beginning to show their true colors, if I can use that pun here now. Something I want to point out while we're talking about the winds layer here, these streamlines that you see. Notice this clockwise rotation just off the eastern coast of the U.S. This here is the Atlantic Ridge, or the Bermuda High that we talk about, that has been steering these storms towards the west and eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. And then on the other side, here you'll see somewhat of a counterclockwise movement here over the coastal bend of Texas. That's a trough. So these are the two major players in terms of steering currents that are affecting these systems and helping to guide them along their paths that have changed significantly today especially. So we're going to get into all that. Just want to bring you up to date on some of the meteorology with that. Current stats on these storms as it stands. 5 o'clock advisory, Marco, a hurricane, has maximum sustained winds of 75 miles per hour. Pressure has dropped just a few clicks, 991 millibars for central pressure here. And it is moving still pretty quickly at 13 miles per hour. Laura, on the other hand, moving much more quickly. Still a tropical storm, and it, like I said, it's hanging out over Hispaniola, now in the waters between Haiti and Cuba. So we're likely to see some kind of intensification here going into the next couple of hours. Don't expect it to weaken. And maybe when it interacts with the mountainous terrain of Cuba, we could see some weakening. But so far, holding on to maximum sustained winds of 60 miles per hour. And we've also seen the pressure drop in this system a bit too. It's not a very strong low pressure center at this storm. It's had some trouble getting that because of the landmass interaction. But it is sitting at 1,000 millibars flat and moving very quickly at 21 miles per hour. That's an increase in forward speed. And if I bring you back to the app here and focus on Laura, we're kind of getting lost in the Gulf of Mexico there. So I'll bring you back to the islands here. And so I mentioned 500 millibars selected here on our My Radar app for winds. Steering currents there, it's about 18,000 feet up in the atmosphere. Notice these strong blues, very strong winds. This storm is riding almost perfectly along the southwestern periphery of that clockwise circle, the high pressure that is rotating off the coast of the eastern U.S. So it's riding along that high pressure, making its way across the islands, and will eventually steer itself into the Gulf of Mexico as we head into the next couple of days here for the rest of your weekend. So that's kind of where we stand with the current status from the 5 o'clock advisory out of the National Hurricane Center. We've seen hurricane hunters flying in and out of these storms for the past several days, and they've just wrapped up some flights into both Marco and Laura. So the next flights that'll be going out here with these for Laura will start around 7:30 tonight, and then Marco will have another flight going out there at about 8 o'clock tonight. So that is where we'll get some more data. Something else that's been interesting is every National Weather Service office will launch 2 balloon soundings every day, morning and night, to get a sample of the atmosphere they're launching extra ones now so that we can get a better idea of the high pressure and the low pressure, the steering mechanisms for these storms. So they're sampling the atmosphere, not where the storms are, but around it, to make sure that we have a great track for these models to kind of predict forward with the data. And for that reason, as we talk through this update, I'm not going to show you model data with future radar and all that I normally would do, because right now they're not initializing well. They're not doing a good job of telling us what's happening right now that we can see on radar, so they're not going to do a good job of predicting what these storms will do. We will have a much better clue of that going on tonight once we get more hurricane hunter data into the models, once we get more of these surface observations from these extra balloon soundings into the models. So once that comes along, it'll be here around 0Z or 8 p.m. Eastern time. And so the 11 o'clock advisory will be very telling to see whatever changes come to the track there. And I want to remind you, Marco is advancing quickly towards the Gulf Coast here. Laura still has a ways to go, not quite in the Gulf of Mexico yet, but moving quickly towards it. The Gulf of Mexico, we've been telling you for the past couple of days, is that magical, experimental kind of window of time here because it's such a shallow basin of very, very warm waters. These storms work off of those warm waters, but they also, if you work with HVAC, with ACs, it's a very good example. The Carnot cycle. It takes in the fuel, compression, expansion, that latent heat, and then it needs an exhaust. So in the upper levels of the atmosphere, Marco has seen some shear, so that's good for exhaust, but too much is not good because then you have too much exhaust. So it gets a little cumbersome there, but the Gulf of Mexico tends to play some tricks on these systems, and that's why the National Hurricane Center has been very conservative in their forecast to catch on to any quick changes in the models, and they're very smart folks who know what they're doing here. So we've seen this play out pretty well so far, and I want to take you to some of our Surfline cameras now to show you some of the conditions out of the beach. We'll start in Pensacola Beach in the Panhandle of Florida. This is by the Florida-Alabama border there, and seas are a little choppy, not looking too bad out there. We got some clouds rolling in, not looking particularly ominous, but perhaps not best the beach day, the best beach day. Now moving over to Panama City Beach. This is a bit further east, so away from the area that we are setting our sights on for a possible landfall from Marco going into tomorrow. When I say possible landfall, I don't mean that we're not sure if it's going to make landfall. It definitely is. I mean the particular exact location of that landfall is still out to the jury. We don't have a particular lock on it. That's why we have a cone for that center. So if you're in the Panhandle of Florida, you're not under any warnings right now, as I'm about to show you, but you do need to keep an eye out for these systems. Now, I want to show you the track for Marco because that is the storm that we'll be dealing with first here along the U.S. Gulf Coast. And coming up in our graphics here, infrared imagery showing you those deep reds and darker shades of gray, the strongest thunderstorms that we've seen over the past 24 hours or so with Marco as it's quickly moved into the Gulf of Mexico here. Now going on, the latest path from the National Hurricane Center has showed that this storm will continue to move northward onto the coastline, and then it's going to make a shift out to a left turn, we'll call it, a shift to the west there. You see it should make landfall as a Category 1 hurricane. Right now that's what the National Hurricane Center is predicting, and then move across the boot of Louisiana, as I call it, interacting with the landmass there and eventually weakening, and it will be moving to the west towards Texas, then deteriorating into an open low. So what that means is folks here along the coastline of Louisiana will be dealing with storm surge. That is probably the biggest concern that forecasters have for folks out here in these communities, especially because of the lower coastline along Louisiana being below sea level, makes it very vulnerable to the waters, and also Category 1 hurricane winds. That's not something that's very friendly. People like to make assumptions off of the wind rating, whether it's Category 1, Category 2, tropical storm. Winds that strong can be dangerous. They are life-threatening. But with this storm, the storm surge is very concerning for folks here along the Louisiana coastline. And as we head into Texas, they need the rain there. So ultimately, the storm could end up being a beneficial contributor to help chip away at some of the drought that's been happening out there. But that's still a long shot along the forecast. Whether the storm dries out before it really gets a chance to help fight the drought there in Texas, that's speculating. That's moving out there. So now I want to show you some of the storm surge watches and warnings that have been issued for the northern Gulf Coast line here. Now this darker shade of pink is a storm surge warning, and I want to draw your attention towards the eastern boot, or the toe of the boot, Louisiana, and where we border along Mississippi. We expect 4 to 6 feet of storm surge for folks along there. So that means 4 to 6 feet of water above where it is normally. So that's above where the ground and water would normally meet. On the bottom of the boot, we'll call it the southern coastline of Louisiana here, in that darker magenta color, we expect 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. And that's because the winds will be pushing the Gulf of Mexico waters inland. So that becomes a particularly dangerous situation for folks there. And I want to bring to your attention, about 2 months ago, at the beginning of June, we had Tropical Storm Cristobal making landfall here along the Louisiana-Mississippi coastline, a very close location to where the current forecast track is taking it. So have that in mind. This storm will be a bit stronger than that, but the storm surge impacts will be fairly similar for folks here. But just because watches and warnings have not been extended very far into the panhandle of Florida doesn't mean that folks in the Big Bend of Florida wouldn't see deteriorating conditions along the coastline. This is a storm that's affecting folks in the basin of the Gulf of Mexico. So think of it this way. You're in the pool. Somebody at the other end jumps in, does a cannonball. You're going to know that somebody jumped in the pool. You'll feel those effects. And surf could be pretty rough for folks here along from the Big Bend all the way out to the coastal bend of Texas. So something to keep in mind. Now, I want to bring you to those current watches and warnings here. Loading up my graphic here. These are associated with Lauber. We'll get to that in a moment. But as far as Marco is concerned, you can see the visible satellite imagery here. This is Marco moving north and northwesterly into the Gulf of Mexico. So let's zoom in a little closer and break down these watches and warnings. The yellow area you see there is a tropical storm watch. That involves from the border of Florida and Alabama all the way up into Mobile Bay, across to the border of Alabama and Mississippi. Once you move westward across the panhandle of Mississippi into Louisiana, you're under a tropical storm warning. And folks, once you cross the line into Louisiana, folks along Lake Pontchartrain, you're not only under a tropical storm warning, but that pink you see there, that lighter pink, denotes a hurricane watch. That means we could see hurricane force conditions in this area within the next 24 to 36 hours. The red you see here is a hurricane warning. That's probably something you expect here. For folks along the toe of the boot, you're under hurricane warning. We do expect this storm to make landfall at least as a Category 1 hurricane. And again, this is where the most concern is for storm surge, damage from there. And those stronger winds, again, maximum sustained winds near the center of Marco, coming in at 75 miles per hour right now. As we head into the evening hours, much is to be said as to the strengthening or weakening of Marco going on into tonight before it makes landfall sometime tomorrow. So we still need to keep a very close eye on this forecast going into the next couple of hours. And then don't forget the rest of the coastline of Louisiana, pretty much out to Morgan City, heading towards the Louisiana-Texas border. We still have tropical storm watches, warnings there, and a hurricane watch noted in that lighter shade of pink. So folks here across the Louisiana border through Mississippi and into Alabama need to be on guard and have those preparations made now in advance. So earlier, a little while ago, I got to speak with Leslie Chapman Henderson from FLASH, the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, and she gave us some insight as to things that folks can do here as they're making their final preparations ahead of the storm.
There are, believe it or not, still things you can do to keep your home safe. Look at your garage door, and if anything is loose on the mounting brackets or up around on the ceiling where the track is, get out your drill or a screwdriver and tighten everything up. A tube of caulk can help you if you can get in your attic and apply that caulk to the intersection of your roof deck and the trusses. All of these things are going to help protect you from, the high wind with the garage. 90% of the time when the house is damaged, it starts with the garage door because it's your largest and weakest opening. What does it affect? Your roof. So by putting that caulk on, you can get 3 times the strength against wind uplift from the storm. Everything that we have and that I'm talking about is available at hurricanestrong.org. And if you get stuck and you have questions, we have podcasts and we have checklists, and you can always email us as well. There are, believe it or not.
So great tips that we heard from Leslie there, and we do expect this to be a very interesting next couple of days, not only as Marco makes its way onshore, but also folks here in a similar area of the Gulf Coast preparing for Laura to make its approach to the coastline here. So we're going to show you the latest track with that here in the graphics. That is way out over the Caribbean islands, like I said, Hispaniola, Haiti, Dominican Republic, just exiting that area, approaching the island of Cuba, and this is what the path looks like here. Mind you, Laura's moving very quickly. It's taking the speedway along that Atlantic ridge, as we showed you in the app a little bit ago. And so it is a tropical storm. It's moving quickly towards the island of Cuba, is going to have some interaction with the land today. As it does so, will once again go over water just south of Cuba, following the landmass pretty closely. But as long as that center stays over the water, that engine keeps going. We get the fuel source, we get the latent heat going, the condensation, compression expansion, and the exhaust in the upper levels. Not much working against this storm, other than the fact that Cuba is a landmass with mountains that tends to disrupt the circulation just a little bit. But so far, the storm has held its own over the other islands that it's interacted with, from the Lesser Antilles all the way across the Virgin Islands into Puerto Rico, Hispaniola today, and now as it makes its trek towards Cuba. Part of the help that's been keeping this thing going is the fact that when it has interacted with land, it's moving quick, 21 miles per hour. That's probably the fastest we've seen the system move now as it comes around the ridge. So the path takes it into the Gulf of Mexico sometime tomorrow evening, and then heading into Tuesday, it'll be in the open Gulf of Mexico waters. Again, here, temperatures very warm. Now you say, we've had a storm come through here. We've been talking about what impacts these storms may have on one another. Well, we got a good day and a half to 2 days difference in storms, so we don't expect much of an impact here. Something you'll notice, the tracks going in different directions. Marco headed a bit west once it comes inland. Laura headed east after it comes inland. We'll talk about that here in a second, but I do want you to keep in mind that Marco isn't going to do much to hinder Laura as it comes through the Gulf of Mexico. Notice National Hurricane Center still thinking that once it approaches those warm open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, Laura will then intensify into not only a Category 1 hurricane, but eventually a Category 2 hurricane. Some of the models that we've seen with the intensity standings have pretty good confidence that the storm could strengthen. Like I said, the Gulf of Mexico tends to have some tricks up its sleeve here, so it's certainly not unfathomable that this storm would reach Category 2, potentially mid-grade Category 2 intensity as it approaches the Gulf Coast. So here it would be closer to the Louisiana-Texas border, take it to a farther west landfall than what Marco would be. Again, this is about 24, 36, almost 48 hours after Marco would be making its landfall. So not really going to have much interaction between the two, although they are following very similar paths. And then once it comes onshore as a hurricane, going to be slowing down just a little bit. Notice that where these markers are between each of the storms, I'll get my pointer out here. Notice this is Tuesday at 2 p.m. This is Wednesday at 2 a.m. These are pretty close together because Laura's still moving very quickly as it rides around that ridge. But once it approaches the Gulf Coast, we see some slowing in the forward speed of this storm. And then as it comes inland, moving out to the east, folks along the Mississippi River, all the way up through the Great Lakes, could see some impacts from this storm in terms of rainfall. And unfortunately, where these systems go, these aren't the folks that really need the rain. We need the rain out west, but folks in the Four Corners region and westward likely aren't going to see much help from these systems as they make their way towards the east. So this is where we stand with both storms. Now I'm going to take you into some of the analysis of the upper air and kind of show you why these storms are going to be taking the paths that they are, what the National Hurricane Center is thinking when they look at all the data from these storms and eventually make these path and intensity forecasts for the storms. So to do that, I'm going to take you to some of our satellite imagery. Yeah, you'll see that I've talked about this past couple of days with a trough over the Gulf Coast. Jet stream moving across the U.S., that is a steering flow. This high out in the Atlantic, that's a steering flow. Well, part of that jet stream has dipped down along the Gulf Coast over the past couple of days and has become somewhat cut off from the main jet stream. So here it is on water vapor. This looks at the top third of the atmosphere down. So it's good to show moisture on this graphic. This is Marco here, these bright colors, purple, orange. That's a lot of moisture, a whole bunch of moisture with this hurricane here. Laura's down over the islands, down here at the bottom of your screen. And then these oranges and darker grays, this is dry air. Notice the motion of this storm is counterclockwise going down through here. I almost lost my pointer there for a second. Coming down this way, moving up and out. This is a trough over the southwestern U.S. or central U.S. Out over the ocean, this is the high that we've been talking about, this clockwise motion here. This is high pressure that's been steering Laura and Marco up into the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm going to point out with our arrows here. This would be the motion of that high, the periphery of it about there. This is the trough coming down over Texas, Mexico, and moving up that way. So you kind of see the driving lane, so to speak, that the upper atmosphere is leaving for these storms. But of course, the atmosphere is always moving, it's always changing. So this is where the paths are going to kind of take different trajectories as they head into the next couple of days on the current track. None of this is written in stone. It's just the trends that the atmosphere is showing us right now. So as Marco makes its approach, low pressure likes low pressure. Birds of a feather stick together. So Marco is going to be drawn closer into this trough. But this trough, it's been sticking around for a couple days, almost a week. It is filling in, it's weakening. Once Marco joins the party here, it's going to start to pack itself up and head on its merry way. So then the main influence, once Laura comes moving up into the Gulf of Mexico here, is going to rely very heavily on that Bermuda high. So once again, drawing that here, that clockwise motion, Laura is going to head more in this direction. And then eventually, as it comes up and makes landfall, notice a more westerly kind of path here, then it will follow that high and head back towards the east and kind of right around the periphery of that edge as it deteriorates over the inland U.S. So that's why those paths are so different, even though we're only a couple days difference in timing for both storms. So that is the general trend with these storms. One more thing that I do want to show you is the visible satellite before we lose daylight here over the Gulf of Mexico. Something that this is a bird's eye view of what's happening over the ocean right now. So we'll look at Laura. It's got a good spin to it, nice shape here with that fanning. On this side of the storm, this northern edge of the storm, notice the clouds aren't looking that organized, not really taking on as much of that classic hurricane or tropical storm look that you would expect. That's because this is about where those winds from the high are kind of shearing those clouds apart. So that's why it looks a little messy on this northeastern side, which the northeastern quadrant of the storm tends to be the strongest part, and we call it the dirty quadrant for a reason. Also, the reason why folks who end up being on that side of the storm see a lot of rainfall and a lot of the impact from winds there. So that's kind of what's going on with Laura there, but otherwise looking pretty good on visible satellite. And this texture that you'll see over here, white on white. Can't really see that very well. Let me point that out with my little arrow here. This thunderstorm here has a lot of really good texture over shooting tops. This is a new batch of stronger thunderstorms that are near the center. So that shows that the storm's interacting. It's using the fuel from those warm waters pretty well, and it's still bubbling up thunderstorms. So still rocking and rolling here with Laura. Now we're going to shift over to Marco in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, it's looked better as it's made its way into the Gulf of Mexico and has a healthier flow, but you can tell it's got a little bit fighting against it. I'll point that out to you here. That trough, remember, coming over Texas, Mexico, up the Gulf coastline here. That's why all these clouds are headed off this way to the northeast, because in the upper atmosphere, those winds are heading in this direction, so kind of shearing off those thunderstorms. And that's why so much rain has been falling over the peninsula of Florida for the past couple of days, because the trough has just been taking all the moisture, not only from the Gulf of Mexico that Marco is using and just dumping it over the southeast. So that's why we've had so much rain here for folks across the southeastern U.S. from Alabama, Georgia, and into the peninsula of Florida. But Marco otherwise looking pretty good. Some thunderstorms bubbling up here. I know the hurricane hunters were sampling this western edge of the storm. Over the past 24 hours, when it was closer to the Yucatan, the storm had a hard time really forming in this western side of the center. And so most of the clouds have been off to the east side with those stronger thunderstorms. So the west side has been somewhat struggling to close in. Since it's moved into the Gulf of Mexico, hasn't really been the case. It's doing a good job of using the fuel source of the Gulf of Mexico. And just a couple hours ago, this thunderstorm here that's starting to calm down a bit was just firing up and bubbling. You could see those overshooting tops really well, really good texture showing up on the satellite imagery to kind of let you know that the storm is holding its own. And I do like to compare these to bubbling pots of water. Now those bubbles just keep coming up. And so that's what's going on here over the Gulf of Mexico. So that's what we can see on satellite radar and imagery. Just a couple reminders when we talk about different categories of hurricanes. Tropical storms obviously below hurricane. That's when winds are between 39 miles per hour to 73 miles per hour. Once you hit 74 miles per hour, then you're in category 1 hurricane range, and that goes from 74 miles per hour to 95 miles per hour. This is where Marco is sitting now, with maximum sustained winds just over that threshold, hitting 75 miles per hour. And Laura, down the road here, once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, again, expected to make landfall as a category 2 at this point. So that would take winds above 95 miles per hour. I was looking at the 5 o'clock advisory, and at landfall, winds predicted to be at around 105 miles per hour. So a healthy category 2 at that when it comes onshore. Got a couple more days for Laura. We're dealing with Marco now. Category 1 expected to make its landfall here as we head into tomorrow. Of course, we'll be here to bring you all of that, so no worries there. But that tends to be the basics that we're dealing with. The interest of time has helped us. Now that these storms are getting closer, we have better tools to sample them with, whether they be radar, when Marco was passing by the island of Cuba, getting a little of that radar in there to see some of the inner workings of the storm. Buoys and oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, those lend some observations to the model data. Like I said, hurricane hunters have been very busy flying flights in and out of there. They have at least 3 each scheduled going into the overnight and tomorrow morning. So more data, and of course those extra soundings that the National Weather Center offices, National Weather Service offices have been lending are very instrumental. So tonight's 11 o'clock advisory will be very well equipped to give us some more future radar, future wind predictions going on for folks along the Gulf Coast. But if you're along the Gulf Coast, I would like you to please wrap up those preparations. Even if you're not in the cone only accounts for where the center of the storm will be making its way. It doesn't account for the outer storms. And some of what we've been reading today shows tropical storm force winds do extend over 100 miles out. So those are things to keep in mind with these storms. Now I'm going to try to take some of the questions that we've got coming on here on YouTube. Let's see if I can pull them up. Oh, we got a couple of friends joining us here. Let's see. Hey Sandy, thanks for joining us. We have Lola here. You are very welcome. We're happy to bring you the information and walk you through these storms. This is our favorite thing to be doing. Damien's over running the controls here, so we'll give a special shout out to him. He's been a trooper, and our other producer Matt. These guys have been working around the clock to help us get out these special updates and the fast forecast. So people who aren't along the Gulf Coast and dealing with the tropics can get a walkthrough of their forecast too. Of course, we'll have that every day, as we always do. So, all right. I don't really see any questions here coming in, but let me check our Facebook and see if any of you all have any specific questions coming in there either. Mind you, I got a lot of technology at my hands here. And just before we came on, I'll let you in on a little secret. I lost a contact, so bear with me. Hope you guys haven't been able to tell too much. So everybody's saying hi. Happy to get an update. All right. Norm asks, so is New Orleans going to get hit? New Orleans, you're about in the center of the track for Marco. Definitely take this time to prepare for a Category 1 hurricane landfall. That's what's happening along the the forecast track at this time, yes, New Orleans, you do need to prepare for this hurricane to come on shore. And like I said, not just folks in the cone. If you're around the cone, from the Big Bend of Florida, we showed you imagery from Panama City. So things not looking the best there. They're not likely to get the worst conditions, but you will get some very heavy rainfall coming from this, and the Gulf of Mexico beating up on the coastline there, that's problematic too. So all things to watch out for. I think Damien's got that Surfline video coming back up for us. We'll give you another look. Oh no, we don't have that for you, but conditions not looking great out there. Not a good time to be in the waters. Rip currents, definitely a concern for folks along the Gulf Coast, not only from the Big Bend of Florida, wrapping all the way around the northern edge to the coastal bend of Texas. Even if you're not seeing very heavy rainfall or any of those kinds of stormy conditions, the seas, like I made the comparison earlier, when somebody jumps into the deep end of the pool and you're in the shallow, you notice it, you feel it. It's a really good medium to get those kinds of impacts. So Nancy asks, isn't the eye indicative of any hurricane? So I think what you're asking there is we haven't really seen much of an eye on satellite imagery for these storms. Marco kind of showing an eye earlier today. Like I mentioned, they had some trouble wrapping in, and that's kind of factored into the uncertainty. These tracks have changed quite a bit in the long run, the 4 to 5 day range, and that's because finding a defined center has been somewhat of a challenge for the folks at the National Hurricane Center, and that's part of the reason why the hurricane hunters are so important, because they don't just fly into the storm and fly around a bit and fly out. They're taking samples at different levels. So the P3 Orions go in and they fly at 10,000 feet, and then they can go up to 18,000 feet. You have the NOAA G4 Gonzo, if you know any of those nicknames. They fly way up there at 30,000, 40,000 feet and take samples from the top of the storm, and then they're dropping these sondes, so these little samples that drop all the way through the storm, and it's the reverse of the soundings that the National Weather Service offices take from the ground up. They drop these sondes down through the storm, and all kinds of data comes through there. So again, another reason why folks at the National Hurricane Center have been so busy working around the clock to get this data out there, because there's just so much to ingest here, especially as we add more observations to the party here. And some of these models, you'll see in the spaghetti plots, we've seen the memes. It's a bunch of lines. There's so many different models that harp on to one specific characteristic. One might kind of play on 500 millibar readings. Some might play on to certain ocean temperatures. And so when they're calculating out these equations, they have one bias that every model will have kind of honed on to. So as they're getting this data in, the models all come together and they build a consensus, and that's why we call it guidance, because it's not no one specific model would be right, and that's why it'd be foolish to just run off with one model. You've heard us talk about the GFS, the ECMWF. It'd be foolish to just harp on to one. The National Hurricane Center takes all of that data into consideration and then go from there. And mind you, it's not just one person working there, so a lot of minds going into the forecast here. We will be giving another update on our social media channels. You'll be seeing them. We may do another live update tonight, depending on what comes out with the 11 o'clock advisory. If we have any big changes, of course, we'll bring that to you. But Marco is closing in on the coastline now, so this tends to be the time where those forecasts kind of lock on, so to speak, going on into the next 36 hours or so. But you can always find the latest information in the MyRadar app, on our social media channels. And you can track along with us in the app, as we showed you at the beginning with our winds layer. We have them at the surface and at 500 millibars. So that is a great way to kind of tinker around and see what's going on in the storms and keep track of some of the information we talked about now in this live. So that's all we got for now regarding the 5 o'clock advisory and the information that came out with that. And an intermediate advisory comes out at 8 p.m. But as we get the next cycle of models coming through in the National Hurricane Center kind of choose on that information for a bit. The next full suite advisory comes out at 11 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Central Time, and we'll get a better look at what to expect going on into the next day or two with both of these storms out in the Atlantic Basin. All right, guys, with an update on Laura and Marco, that's all we got for you here. Check out our social media channels, and we'll catch you back here later.